For the past several years, the United States and Southern California, including the county of San Bernardino, have experienced the opioid epidemic. This issue has been compounded by the introduction of fentanyl and its counterparts into the drug market. Fentanyl is being introduced into heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine, and marijuana. Recently, drug traffickers have been producing counterfeit pharmaceutical pills that appear to be legally manufactured pills containing unknown chemical compounds, including fentanyl. The user does not know what they are ingesting or the concentration of the substance, causing a massive spike in overdose and overdose deaths in this country. To compound the problem, California has lessened the penalties for drug-related crimes with legislation like Proposition 47. In February of 2021, our department created an overdose response team in response to the opioid epidemic and specifically fentanyl overdose deaths. The team consists of 2 rotating teams of narcotics investigators. The team is on call 24/7 to respond to suspected fentanyl overdose deaths, to assist and assume the investigation. Assemblymember Ramos proposed Assembly Bill 1627 that will be instrumental in providing additional resources to our overdose response team. The department has a great working partnership with the County Department of Behavioral Health regarding mental health programs and training. Assembly Bill 1627 would further expand our relationship and our training between the 2 organizations and provide the necessary naloxone, commonly referred to as Narcan, for both agencies. This will help us prevent deaths related to overdoses, and Assembly Bill 1627 would give us access to this life-saving medication. Since early February 2021, the overdose team has responded to 106 call-outs for 108 victims. 97 of the 108 victims were fatal, and 4 of those fatalities were juveniles. The average age of these victims was 32 years old, and they come from all backgrounds, all walks of life: teens, people who are addicted to pain medication, and lifelong drug users. In 2021, our narcotics unit seized 769 pounds of fentanyl with an estimated wholesale value of over $26 million. Fentanyl is extremely potent, fast-acting if inhaled or ingested, and a deadly dose of fentanyl can be as little as 2 milligrams. It is 50 times more powerful than heroin and 100 times stronger than morphine. Social media is the leading avenue that connects users and dealers through friend suggestions. Assembly Bill 1608 would address restricting this activity by having online platforms create a policy prohibiting the use of the platform to illegally distribute controlled substances. I want to thank Assemblymember Ramos for his support and fight against the opioid epidemic and for his continued support of law enforcement. Thank you, James.
Thank you, Sheriff. Well, thank you, Sheriff, for bringing the data, statistics, and where we are with this battle against fentanyl. Fentanyl-related deaths are skyrocketing across California and the nation. Fentanyl-related deaths continue to be an epidemic within our county and within our state and our nation. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and the National Center for Health Statistics recently announced that 100,000 people died of overdoses from illegal synthetic opioid fentanyl between April of 2020 and April of 2021. It was the first time drug-related deaths reached 6 figures in any 12-month period. According to news reports, the milestone data showed there are now more overdoses related to fentanyl than there were overdose fatalities from all drugs in 2016. Fentanyl is a deadly crisis ravaging our young people, adults, and our state. Unfortunately, there is no one answer, no one cure. We must battle this crisis on many fronts. In our schools, by doing all we can to provide the mental health and educational resources kids and parents need to avoid and resist substance abuse. On the public mental health front, with adequate services and financial assistance for treatment. Through our medical healthcare system to ensure treatments for addiction and overdose emergencies are readily available. And by monitoring social media platforms to keep ahead of new technologies where bad actors are preying on to sell illegal substances to our young people and to those in our community. It's time we hold them accountable for their platforms. And through law enforcement, by ensuring that they have training and tools and the resources to track and stop the predators who bring so much grief and loss to our communities, and especially by working together in collaboration with other colleagues in the state legislature in a bipartisan fashion. We continue to work to tackle these issues that are affecting our community. Fentanyl is an area that we're going to continue to tackle together in collaboration, as well as holding social media platforms accountable for what they're selling to our young people and how easily and accessible it has been up until these points to get fentanyl over the internet. And on a bipartisan effort, we are working together on Assembly Bills 1627 and 1628, because it will take a full legislature, not just one party over another, but working together for all those in the state of California, and especially here in San Bernardino County. We continue to work together on AB 1627, which would create pilot programs through the State Department of Public Health and local behavioral health and law enforcement departments to provide free Narcan use to individuals who train and become proficient in their use, and to be able to be on that front line when someone needs that treatment. AB 1627 would also create another tool for law enforcement. It would also award grant funding to local law enforcement for developing response teams to investigate opioid-related overdoses upon appropriation of the legislature, which we're going to work to make sure that we continue to bring that to fruition. AB 1628 would hold social media platforms accountable for their policies to prevent and monitor the distribution of illegal drugs, such as fentanyl, on their platforms. Substance abuse is a societal problem that demands each of us to do our part to fight it. Social media platforms can play a big role in two ways: educating the public about the dangers of illegal drugs and monitoring their platforms to catch those using social media to facilitate drug distribution. AB 1628 would require online platforms to develop and prominently display policies to their users prohibiting the use of their sites for illegal distribution of banned substances. It would also require the platforms to submit their policies to the Attorney General of the state of California and to partner with agencies to support and uphold those policies. I'm deeply committed to the passage of these two bills, and many thanks to all that are here today to support these endeavors. And it's a bipartisan approach that we're taking at the state legislature here in the state of California and here in San Bernardino County. Today with me is one of my co-authors, principal co-authors from the Senate, and the Senator Rosalicia Ochoa Bogue. And at this time, I would like to invite her up to say a few words.
Thank you, Assemblymember Ramos, for the kind introduction. I would first like to express my gratitude to Assemblymember James Ramos for the invitation to speak on such an important issue. As we all know, the fentanyl epidemic has been ravaging the Southern California region in recent years. This issue hits home for SD 23. There were 227 fentanyl-related deaths in Riverside County in 2020 alone, and in recent months, 50% of all overdose deaths in Los Angeles County have been attributed to fentanyl. San Bernardino County has faced a 656% increase from 30 to 227 fentanyl-related deaths since 2018. These statistics are tragic, to say the least. Fentanyl is a synthetic opioid that can be formulated to be 50 times more potent than heroin, and fatal fentanyl overdoses occur at mere couple thousands of a gram. Often the user of these drugs does not know that the drugs they are consuming contain this dangerous substance, and far too many have lost their lives as a result. My office has received many calls from parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, friends, all urging action in the name of a loved one. That is why I am here. I am here as a mother myself, and in the name of all those victims, to help bring attention to the senseless deaths occurring throughout the state. Today, I proudly join Assemblymember Ramos in confronting this epidemic head-on. I believe the legislature must take a stand and unequivocally let our families know that we hear them. We must no longer tolerate the loss of innocent lives or accept the misconceptions formulated to distract us from the real issue by blaming victims as simple drug addicts. AB 1627 and AB 1628 will provide much-needed local support to law enforcement and address the role social media platforms have played in distributing this dangerous substance. Together, we can address the root of the issue and save lives. At this time, I would like to introduce City of Redlands Chief of Police Christopher R. Catron.
Thank you, Senator. Good morning. My name is Chris Catron. I'm the Chief of Police of the City of Redlands, as well as the incoming President for the California Police Chiefs Association. I want to thank Assemblymember Ramos for inviting me here today for introducing this legislation to combat the alarming rise in fentanyl. I want to underscore the rise, which has accelerated so rapidly over the last decade, it's almost impossible to comprehend. 10 years ago, we hardly saw any fentanyl-related deaths in San Bernardino County. Now we see hundreds of individuals dying every year from fentanyl and other synthetic opioids. If you look at data from California Department of Public Health's Overdose Surveillance Dashboard, the death rate for these cases in San Bernardino has climbed nearly 500% over the last few years. But this is not an issue isolated to San Bernardino County. Police chiefs across the state are facing the same problem, a flood of fentanyl leaving death and debris in its wake. The magnitude of concern for this problem warrants a dedicated solution, and that is what Assembly Bill 1627 provides. By directing state funding to local law enforcement agencies for overdose response teams, we can expand our operations to go after those manufacturing and distributing fentanyl, and ultimately save lives. These joint operations require additional resources to provide our officers the time and supplies they need to conduct these very complex investigations. This is critical because we have seen how successful these types of investigations can be, but unfortunately have also watched these operations get shut down due to lack of funding. Just last summer, law enforcement seized more than 40 pounds of fentanyl, which is 100 times more potent than morphine, as a result of a joint investigation in the Bay Area. AB 1627 will ensure additional resources are allocated to help our agencies remove more of this deadly narcotic from our communities. Again, I want to thank Assemblymember Ramos for his work on this issue and his unwavering commitment to the safety of our communities. Thank you. Next, I'd like to invite up the parent of one of these victims, Mr. Steve Filson.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here today. It's a most important subject. My name is Steve Filson. I'm a retired police officer from the city of San Bernardino. I'm the current Secretary Treasurer of Void, which is an organization in California known as the Victims of Illicit Drugs. And most importantly, I'm Jessica's dad. This is my daughter, Jessica, who at the age of 29 was killed by illicit fentanyl, and pictured with her is my darling 5-year-old granddaughter, who now lives with my wife and I. I wanted to thank personally and now publicly Chief Catren and his agency. The Redlands Police Department was the primary investigating agency for Jessica and her boyfriend's death, along with the partnering with the city of San Bernardino in investigating 2 additional deaths that occurred from the same incident. 4 deaths on January 22nd, 2020, 4 lives taken. Sheriff Dykus, then Sheriff McMahon, Deputy Chief Newport, provided us the opportunity to meet with them last year at about this time. And when we spoke as bereaved parents of what we felt to be the problem, the need for education and awareness, but also the elimination of the stigma of addiction and the need for effective and efficient and complete police investigations. For God's sakes, the Sheriff's Department within weeks created their overdose response team, and you heard the results that Sheriff Dykus now says that they have accomplished during the past year. Senator Ochoa Bo, your efforts at the time with SB 350, it was a shame to see you sitting there as the lone warrior at the Public Safety Committee, but your efforts were extremely well appreciated. Assemblymember Ramos, I can't say enough about you. Your friendship to me, your advocacy, not only for this effort, but in being an assembly member, is resoundingly appreciated, and I can't thank you enough. These bills will begin the process of enacting the needed legislative efforts to more directly address this societal scourge that we have known as fentanyl. AB 1627 provides for the availability of naloxone, as we know is commonly known as Narcan. This is a potential life-saving tool to be administered in situations involving suspected opioid overdose or fentanyl poisoning, a much needed and valuable resource that we can't delay in getting to the public. The bill further provides for establishment of grant funding to the California Department of Public Health to local law enforcement agencies to create response teams to address the fentanyl distribution and the ensuing deaths. The importance of this investigative resource is clearly evident. Set aside substance use disorder, addiction, or anything else, and understand victims were deceived in taking something that they believed it to be, but it wasn't. In being deceived, they were poisoned, and in being poisoned, they were murdered. This would hopefully lead to the creation of a standard protocol to be used when investigating these types of poisoning incidents. The thresholds of implied malice and malice aforethought are difficult, but not impossible to attain. Complete and thorough investigations would seem to overcome, in a lot of cases, that obstacle in meeting that threshold. The San Bernardino Sheriff's Department and other agencies throughout California have proven so. Bring the needed evidence to prosecutors, and I believe society would expect them to fulfill their responsibility. AB 1628 is the first step in establishing long overdue standards of transparency and accountability to social media platforms such as Snapchat. It's easy to say you have a policy prohibiting the sale of narcotics and other criminal acts, but when distributors of illicit fentanyl continue to peddle their poison seemingly unabated on these social platforms, there continues to be a problem, and not enough is being done by them. We look forward to this process of accountability being enacted by the legislature, and we look forward to further conversation with Assemblymember Ramos and anyone else who will listen not only to us, but our national partners to hear additional suggestions that we are pushing to make the legislation even more appropriate in addressing the problem. Again, I can't thank you enough. This is such, and it's not an insurmountable, but education and awareness is the problem. Remember these 3 things. Fentanyl changes everything, but for fentanyl, our kids would still be here, and fentanyl remains a problem that most don't seem to know exists, although it's starting to gain its notoriety. It's my pleasure to now introduce my president, avoid victims of illicit drugs. Jaime Puerta.
I'll try not to get emotional. I kind of do, and every time I talk about my son, Daniel Joseph Puerta Johnson, who became a victim to illicit fentanyl poisoning on April the 6th of 2020. He was only 16 and a half years old. Between April of 2019 and April of 2020, there was 93,300 drug deaths in the United States. 70% of those were all due to fentanyl. And between April of 2020 through April of 2021, we have 100,304 drug deaths in the United States, 64% due to fentanyl. This is a problem that each year just continues to double itself. And what's being used to peddle this poison are social media apps like Snapchat, which provides the perfect delivery system to the most vulnerable of our society, and it's our children between ages of 13 to 17 years of age. And nothing is being done about it because they claim the protections of Section 230C. Mr. Ramos, thank you so much. Ms. Ochoa, thank you so much. It takes a lot of courage and fortitude to want to come up with some kind of answer to the scourge that is plaguing our communities. Every day, you have approximately 300 people dying every day due to fentanyl poisoning, and everybody seems to be sticking their head in the sand. But these people, these good people to my left, have decided to take a stand and wanting to do something about this scourge and trying to save our most vulnerable. Education and awareness is key. We're not going to arrest our way out of this problem, but you must understand this. Right now, fentanyl poisoning is taking more lives than COVID-19, suicide, cancer, gun violence, and car accidents combined. That's where we're at today. But due to the stigma of addiction and overdose death, nobody is really talking about it. And that's why we need to have the conversation today and try to stop all of these deaths from happening. Again, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. My son Daniel thanks you both. Don't forget his face, because he's just a drop in an ocean of all of the children who have died in this nation due to fentanyl poisoning. Remember his face. Remember his name. Daniel Puerta Johnson. Please do not forget him. Thank you.
I'd also like to bring up to say a few words is Jacqueline Rodriguez, Public Affairs Officer representing the San Bernardino County District Attorney, Joseph Anderson.
Thank you, Assemblymember Ramos. I'll be delivering remarks on behalf of San Bernardino County District Attorney's Office and District Attorney Jason Anderson, who is unable to make it due to a long-standing work conference. The challenge for prosecutors in the fight against the fentanyl epidemic and the additional rise in drug-induced homicides is that we're faced with the reluctancy of many in California legislature to put a notice requirement into law, and the reluctancy to allow for sentencing enhancements for prior offenses. What that does is it puts criminals into favor, and it leaves families of the victims feeling like there's little to no hope for any accountability for the dealers or distributors of drugs. I'm going to take you back 40 years to 1981. California legislation approved into law the Watson Advisement. And that's an advisement, and it's a notice requirement given after the first DUI conviction. It's a statement that says if the offender understands the deadly risk of drinking and driving, and then they kill a human being in a second DUI, they can be charged with murder. Now fast forward to today, And we have no notice requirement for drug dealers, and we're yet facing illicit fentanyl killing hundreds of thousands of people, targeting our youth, and as we've all said here, they're largely thinking they're taking one drug or they're ingesting one thing, but they are taking something else. And it's laced with fentanyl, and frankly, it's death in disguise. So in San Bernardino County, we have one individual charged with first-degree murder, and that's to conduct related to the sale of fentanyl. We also have several cases pending investigation. We've leaned into our partnerships with sheriffs. We've shared our resources with multiple agencies, and we've embedded one of our investigators from the Bureau of Investigation into Sheriff's Overdose Response Team. But at the rates we're seeing, the bottom line is that if fentanyl poisoning hasn't affected you personally, it soon will. And that means that every single person in this county shares a responsibility to fight the opioid crisis. And that responsibility is in awareness, in prevention, in response, and in holding accountable social media, dealers, and distributors. So on behalf of San Bernardino County District Attorney's Office and District Attorney Jason Anderson, we support and commend both you, Assemblymember Ramos, Senator Ochoa-Bogue, everybody up here today for putting legislation forward that protects the citizens of San Bernardino County. Thank you. I'd like to introduce Dr. Jonathan Avalos, who will be answering questions, medical questions on behalf of San Bernardino County Department of Behavioral Health.
Thank you. Any questions related to fentanyl or the mechanism of naloxone? Yes, sir.
Alex with KMBC. Can you talk about what effects it has on a young child? Because it sounds like it's really impacting that youth.
In a word, devastating effects. Fentanyl causes abrupt and in many cases lethal respiratory arrest. What that means is the drug tricks the nervous system into cessation of breathing. Naloxone in a child, in an infant, in an adolescent, or even in an older person afflicted by addiction works by reversing that effect, by binding at the same receptor in the nervous system aggressively. Fentanyl and other opioids are displaced, and that individual is restored to breathing in many cases. In some cases, secondary or even third doses are required, but it gives the victim of that overdose event a fighting chance to enter treatment and to live a better life.
Can you talk, sir, about the amount that is considered to be deadly? Because I'm hearing that it's the amount of rice.
Right. Right. Depending on the tolerance and the concentration of the preparation, fentanyl is lethal in incredibly small doses. In the few appropriate clinical applications in which it is used, it is measured in micrograms. So a fraction of a milligram. At doses of 1 to 2 milligrams, it can be lethal. Briefly, the sooner the better. Anoxic brain injury can occur within 3 minutes of cessation of breathing, analogous to a drowning. Within 5 minutes, an individual experiencing respiratory arrest will be dead. And because of that reason, it is necessary to put this medicine into the hands of law enforcement, families, and our communities across the state. Any further questions? Okay.
I just have one more question. I think if this could be for the district attorney.
Yeah, we're going to open it up in a minute.
Okay.
Oh, we'll open it up.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. The Department of Behavioral Health and the medical profession would like to thank Assemblymember Ramos for passing this legislation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Doug. Well, thank you. for all those that spoke, and you've seen it, real life issues with parents and the issues that are there, and then the medical profession coming up and attesting to the need for the training for Narcan, not only with law enforcement, but with loved ones that many times will be on the front lines to those that need to be administered Narcan. And so at this time, we'd open it up for any questions for any of the speakers that spoke here today on this issue.
So I just had a question regarding the challenges with charging somebody with murder, especially if, some would say that there's no intent for a dealer when they're, when they have fentanyl, they're just trying to make money. So how would you charge somebody with murder? How are you able to kind of get through? Is there a process that you guys have to be able to do that?
Thank you, Shelby. So recently what we've seen is that we have a bill, AB 350, that's been killed twice so far in the last year, and that is to give that notice requirement into California law that we can have a statement saying that an offender, after their drug deal conviction, can be made aware that any further offenses that result in death would be considered implied malice. So we don't have that signed into California legislation yet. That's something that we're working with. But our one case that we do have right now, it is first-degree murder that we're charged the individual with, and hopefully next month that will move forward.
Which both myself and Senator Ochoa Bogue are both co-authors of that bill also. Any other questions for any of the presenters and speakers?
Sure, can you talk to us about how often are your deputies on the streets coming across this fentanyl? Is it something that they're seeing all the time? I know you think a lot about the streets, but is it becoming too common now?
Yes, we do see it regularly. We see it not only regularly on the streets, but even in our correctional systems. There's a lot of times we see what I call planned events based on prison realignment and a number of things you've seen occur in this state. A probationer, for instance, could get a flash incarceration from their probation officer, secrete fentanyl on their person, bring it into the jail, and there's been many times that I've experienced seeing 6 overdoses all at one time because of that specific action. We're seeing the exact same thing on the streets. Any other questions for me? Most of it we're getting appears to be coming from south of the border. And to address why are kids taking this fentanyl, it is masked, just like we said earlier, to look like OxyContin. South of the border, they have pill presses that make it look just like one of the pills that these kids may experience at what they call pill parties. A very dangerous practice where they put these pills on a plate, and more of a truth or dare scenario where the kids might take one of these things. Things that normally would not kill them. In the case of fentanyl, we're dealing with something entirely different. Thank you.
Senator, can I address one item, please? if
Yeah.
I may? And the
You can step up to the podium, please.
The KTLA reporter brought up a very good point. Yeah. It's become part of me, I'm sorry. You brought up a very good point. And when we talk about murder, the various degrees of murder, first degree, you have to show malice aforethought. And when we talk about second degree murder in lower forms in the manslaughter area, we talk about implied malice. The purpose of SB 350 was to provide that warning, as they did under the Watson rule for drunk driving, that once arrested, you're advised that, hey, what you're doing is dangerous, and what you're doing could lead to somebody's death. And if you continue to do it, we'll charge you, or we have the ability to charge you, because now that implied malice is set through the advisory. What is being lost in translation is what we have brought up, is an advisory, even though an important tool, is not necessary to show implied malice, as demonstrated by sheriff's investigators, by Redlands police investigators, Riverside County investigators who've had filed up to 10 cases of murder under the implied malice theory without an advisement. Don't look at one source as the catch-all to anything. I have always been of the opinion that an effective, intelligent, and comprehensive police investigation that holds all the evidence will result in people being charged. That's what needs to be done.
Thank you for that, Steve. And you could view these two bills joining 350 as an arsenal of bills tackling the issue and the crisis that we're facing with fentanyl. Certainly, we want to be able to get resources to the parent, to the loved one, and even to those that are using in times where they're suffering an overdose, to get them the information and get them the resources they need, like Narcan, to make sure that they have a shot at overcoming that overdose in the first place. And that's what one of the bills does, is bring the training and get Narcan into the use. But we also want to hold accountable the social platforms, where we've heard from meetings that we've had with parents and those of loved ones that lost someone, that they actually bought fentanyl over the social platform, and particularly brought up the name Snapchat. So we want to hold them accountable. So looking at these bills, joining the arsenal of those now combating the crisis that we're engaged in with fentanyl, making sure that we have the resources available, and heightening the awareness of the crisis that's going on with the overdoses, in particularly to fentanyl, and to make sure that the parents and the loved ones that are out there know that they're not crying out alone, that there is legislators that are listening and moving forward on pieces of legislation to help to bring awareness and advocacy to this issue. I want to thank everybody for attending this press conference here today, and it's just the beginning. It's not meant to solve the crisis, it's meant to start the beginning and the awareness to where we need to be to come full circle, so that those that are out there on the front lines have the resources like Narcan to be able to administer in times of life-saving situations, but also holding social media platforms accountable for what they're selling over their social media platforms, many times to young people in our community. We want to make sure that we're there standing together. And you can see myself and Senator Ochoa Bogue standing together in collaboration in a bipartisan effort to make sure that we're bringing these issues to the forefront here in San Bernardino County and in the state of California. Thank you for attending.